Welcome to the Kosher Australia annual Pesach Q&A 5777. We are here to explain and elaborate on difficult, complicated shilas that have been coming into the Kosher Australia offices the past 3 weeks. We've been inundated with hundreds of Pesach-related questions, and there's a lot of confusion out there, we think, and people want to know what to do. So the goal of this Q&A is to try to explain clearly some of the more common shilas and the more difficult shilas that we have received. We are honored again this year to have the presence of our Rav HaMakshir, Rabbi Mordechai Gutnick Shlita, to join us to help us maneuver through these somewhat difficult times and try to make it a little easier and clarify what is necessary according to the halacha and where might people be going too far, try to make things a little clearer and easier. Thank you for joining us, Rabbi Gutnick.
Pleasure.
We also have to thank, as we do every single time, our Director of Marketing, Mr. Akiva Melman. Is that your title? Director of Marketing? Okay, Director of Marketing. For setting everything up. We just come here and talk, but Kiwi is the one who's behind it and organizing everything and putting in hours and hours, so we appreciate that. Thank you very much, Kiwi. So let us begin. We'll start with chronologically from the beginning. Many people already are in full swing with their cleaning for Pesach, getting the house ready, and sometimes it can be very, very stressful. Rabbi Gutnick, could you please explain to us what are the halachic requirements for cleaning a house for Pesach and what might be going too far?
It's a very complicated question, but basically the idea of cleaning for Pesach is to fulfill the mitzvah of taking out chometz, of removing chometz from one's place on Pesach so that we don't have it in our possession and we don't obviously inadvertently come to eat chometz. Bal yiro, bal yimotz, should not be found, should not be seen in one's house. But that's only with regard to making sure that you are cleaning out the places where there is actual chometz. If you know that there are places in your house that chometz would never have been, never have reached, then in those circumstances you don't really have to check them and clean them out. For instance, if one has a ceiling in rooms in the house where there is absolutely no way in which chometz is going to be on the ceiling because you haven't eaten on the ceiling for a long time. So in those circumstances, you really don't need to clean the ceilings.
Would that apply also, let's say, above the stovetop in the kitchen?
No, in the stove, where chometz could have reached, where it's possible that the fumes from chometz when it's being cooked on the stove, or the steam that comes out of the pots and pans and things like that reaches, then obviously that area should be cleaned.
To the vent on top of the stove.
The vent on top of the stove, that area should be cleaned because that can have actual chometz on it. So it's really a matter of using your common sense and having a look around and saying, look, has there really been chometz there? I mean, on the top of my shelves behind where we're sitting at the moment now, those forum have never been used with chometz. Those shelves have never been used in the presence of chometz. So really, in reality, other than for spring cleaning purposes, they don't really need cleaning for Pesach.
It's only looking at places where potentially chometz might have been. One has to be concerned for a remote, maybe a high closeted kid climbed up there and...
Yeah, if again, you've got to use your common sense. I mean, Shulchan Aruch talks about if you see mice in the place, and the mice have run away with food in the past, and they're running into an area where you don't normally bring chometz, but they could have brought the chometz in there. Then once you've seen the mouse, you have to do something about it, and you have to check it out. But if again, common sense, where you think that there could be chometz, fine. Where there's no real reason to believe that there is chometz there, then you really don't have to go overboard and really get tired oneself out and come into Pesach haggard and tired and hassled under those circumstances.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now, the actual search for chometz. So we know that even though that's the halacha, in reality, many people go much beyond that, and their house is completely sparkling clean when it comes to the evening of the 14th of Nisan. This year is a Sunday night. So the chiv b'dika, the obligation to search for chometz, applies on the Sunday night. Was it April 9th, I think it is this year? So if someone's house is completely clean by that point in time, so is the actual b'dikas chometz just a symbolic act, and you put out the 10 pieces of bread, or is there more to it?
No. The idea of b'dikas chometz on the eve of Pesach is really with regard to ensuring that we do that last check. In other words, you have to have in mind here that this is not just a ritual I'm not just doing this, running around and just doing something for the kids. But in reality, this is something that needs to be considered as your final check for chometz, that you actually have in mind, just in case there is something that I have missed, just in case there's something that may have been put there since I last cleaned this particular area. Have in mind that this is indeed a serious search. And even if we put out the 10 pieces, which is the custom of many people to put out 10 pieces of chometz and to collect them during the search, and the 10 pieces are symbolic because of Kabbalistic reasons and so on, but it's not just a matter of going around and collecting those 10 pieces, because you're not really searching, you know where you've put those pieces. The idea of collecting the 10 pieces is really there just to fulfill the Kabbalistic aspects of B'dikas chometz, but just by picking up those pieces alone and not doing a proper search, you really have not fulfilled your obligation of really doing a proper search for chometz.
So one should go through all the rooms and just make sure things were cleaned properly, and actually look for the chometz, not just look for those 10 pieces. Again, just the last question on the b'dikas chometz. Let's say, and it happens, that a person finds chometz on Pesach. Right. They miss something. They look on the washing machine. They see chometz there. What should they do?
On Pesach, if you find chometz,
let's say on Yom Tov and then on Chol Hamoed.
Right. Technically speaking, that chometz has been, if you've nullified the chometz, then in those circumstances you haven't really transgressed the major Torah command of having chometz in your possession. And particularly nowadays, when most people sell their chometz, you can say that particular chometz is sold as well. But what we really need to ensure when we are finding that piece of chometz is that it should not be in our presence. It's not something, even if we say it might technically be yours, but it is there. Somebody might come to grab it and to eat it, especially a kid comes along and so on. So you really have to destroy it. You have to get rid of it. It's not something you had really in mind when you sold the chometz, and so therefore it has to be destroyed. One way to do it is to burn it. Another way to do it is to flush it away in the toilet if you can't burn it. And in that way, you are making sure that you are not transgressing in any shape or form the concept of having chometz found in your house. If it's found on Yom Tov, then you can't burn it. You can't even really necessarily handle it because it's really muktzah. So what you have to do is put something over it, put a cup over it if it's a small piece, or put a pot over it, or whatever it may be, box, and then as soon as Yom Tov is over, destroy it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now let's move now towards the actual cleaning for Pesach as far as koshering appliances in the kitchen. This is also an area where there is a lot of confusion, and people aren't sure exactly how to kosher the different kitchen appliances. This is a question that we've received many, many times in the office. How do we kosher our stoves, our ovens, our microwaves? So I'd like to go through 6 appliances and see exactly how one should kosher them for Pesach. Now, we all know when we're coming to kosher a kli, a vessel, for Pesach, there are 2 potential issues. Or in other words, chometz can exist in 2 different forms in the appliance. We can have the actual, what's called mamoshes, which means this actual pieces of chometz, let's say, on the oven or in the sink. Of course, that must be removed. There's also an issue of absorption of chometz, usually by way of heat, where if hot chometz was used in the oven, obviously in the sink, and the absorption will go into the sink. So how does one kosher? Let's start with the oven. Can one kosher? And if so, how does one kosher an oven for Pesach?
Okay, there are a lot of rules and regulations with regard to koshering, but the basic laws are based on the concept of kabbalah kachpelte, the way in which it receives the chometz, it's absorbed the chometz into it. That's the way it gives it off in the koshering process. So something, for instance, is absorbed through water, through liquid, through boiling it in a pot, has to be koshered through boiling water. If something has been absorbed through heat in an oven, directly from the heat of an oven, it has to be koshered through direct heat with a blowtorch or some other open fire that does it. So using those particular principles, we apply them in each individual cases. In the case of an oven, because the oven works with heat, direct heat, on things that are being baked without liquids really, or very little liquid if there is liquid, so therefore the way in which it is absorbed chometz is through that way. We have to kosher it in the same way. It has to be koshered with fire. Now, some people will go to the extent of actually koshering it and getting everything as hot as possible with a blowtorch and so on. if you're able to do that, fine. If you're capable of doing that, fine. By all means, why not? But
that could be dangerous for the untrained individual.
People who are untrained, who are
stories.
untrained and who don't know how to do it and are worried about doing it that way. There are other methods of doing it which are also considered just as good. Basically, a very simple way of koshering an oven. If you don't have the blowtorch, you don't want to use it, then in those circumstances, all you need to do is to make sure, first of all, the oven is totally clean. This method does not work with actual pieces of food that are still stuck on grease and so on that's still in your oven. So the first job is to get it totally clean as best as you can with a good oven cleaner. Then you turn on the oven for a period of approximately, modern ovens today, if you do it for about an hour at close to the highest temperature that you can do, you'll reach a temperature inside that oven that's always higher than what has been used during the cooking. And in those circumstances, the kabbalah kachbota, the way in which it's received the chometz, gives off the chometz, is reached by putting it on a much higher fire and putting it on for an hour and getting it to a temperature that will be considered as sufficient. Even so, when it comes to the actual racks where you put the food actually on, or the Pesach dicker vessels actually on, even if you've kashered in that method, always good to put a piece of foil around the rack, and in that way make sure that it doesn't actually come in contact with the actual Pesach dishes or the actual Pesach food.
So the racks can also be koshered inside the oven on the highest temperature for an hour.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move along now to the stovetop. Now, obviously, the stovetop, there are two parts. You have the grates where the pots actually sit upon, and then you have the surface of the stovetop. How does one kosher those two?
Well, it depends what sort of a stove you've got. If you've got a stove that's an electric stove, then you just turn on the coils of the electric stove. Once they get red hot, which they usually do, then you have no problem with that area where the pot actually rests on. Mm-hmm. What you've got a problem is with the spill area that's all around it, and there you have to make sure that you can kosher that. There are some who say you can kosher that with boiling water, because the way in which it becomes no good is because something boiled over and went onto it, came through a liquid, it's given off through a liquid. There are others who say, no, we've got to get a bit of a higher temperature than just the boiling water temperature, and pouring boiling water over it is not going to really be sufficient. And they will say what you do, the best way of doing it, if you don't mind giving it a try, is to put something like a blech over the top of it, turn your fires on, and that way the heat that's generated under the blech is usually good enough to kosher that area that is the splash area, as we call it.
And that's without the blech touching that area, just being in close proximity, it'll get that heat to that level.
And another way, if you have difficulty in koshering any stove, if you can't for whatever reason, you don't want to, is to actually use a blech during the whole of Pesach, to actually cover up the stove with a blech, with a metal sheet, and maybe you can even make a few holes where the actual fire is, and that way it'll cook better than if the fire is totally covered. And in that particular way, you are never coming in contact with its stovetop, and so therefore it's perfectly okay to do that.
So if let's say you don't want to kosher the spill area, you don't have a blech, could you just cover it with, let's say, aluminum foil, cover that spill area? As long
as the aluminum foil is not going to tear. In other words, you need
maybe
more than one layer,
layers,
probably 2 or 3 layers, or maybe even 4 layers, to make sure. And as soon as it does tear, you should make sure that you recover it.
Mm-hmm. And the same would apply to the racks in the oven. I can just cover that with aluminum foil. Yes. Obviously, have holes in between, so the circulation in the oven is not affected. Okay, let's move now. Thank you. Let's move now to the sink. How does one kosher a sink for Pesach?
Sink is a little easier because a sink usually only can become chometz through liquids. You usually pour things into it, or you wash dishes, chometz stick dishes inside the sink, and so therefore, if it becomes chometz stick needs to be koshered for Pesach through liquids, then as we mentioned previously, the way in which it receives the chometz, that's the way in which it gives off. So liquid is good enough, boiling water is good enough. Technically speaking, if you really think that you haven't used your sink for anything other than pouring liquids into it, therefore it can be koshered by pouring boiling water from a boiling kettle or a boiling pot of water. You take it and you pour it all over the sink after it's been cleaned. And also with regard to that type of koshering, you need to wait 24 hours since its last use. So you can use it with cold things, but anything where it's warm, where it might have absorbed something in the past 24 hours, you should wait until 24 hours have passed. Don't use hot water or hot things in that sink. Wait the 24 hours, make sure it's been cleaned beforehand from any surface dirt, and then you pour boiling water all over it. Others will say, well, let's go a little bit stronger than that, because you might have poured stuff into the sink solid pieces might have fallen into the sink. You're making pasta and you're pouring out the water and the pasta falls into the sink, and pasta is obviously chometz. So therefore, in those circumstances, because it could have been not just through pouring boiling water on it, but actual heavy chometz itself would have been connected to the sink. In those circumstances, you need a little bit hotter water than just what comes out of a boiling kettle, because once it's poured out of the kettle, it loses some degree of temperature, and they will put hot stones, heat stones on the fire beforehand, put a few hot stones around the sink, and when you're pouring the boiling water, the stones will raise the water that's fallen down and might have lost a few degrees. You'll see it'll sizzle and bubble. That means it's raised back up to boiling point, and that is considered sufficiently good enough to kasher the sink.
And again, be very careful also with those stones
100%.
to make sure that...
and be careful with pouring the
boiling hot water also, that's right. Now, does that also apply for the oven and stovetop, that you must wait 24 hours, or there's...
Now, if you're using fire to kasher something, you don't have to wait the 24 hours.
Only if it's used water. Okay. How about a dishwasher? I've heard there's a big machlokes haposkim whether one can kasher a dishwasher for Pesach. Can one kasher it?
Again, those who are extra careful and can go for 8 days without a dishwasher, then in those circumstances, that's the ideal way to look at it. But if one really wants to kasher a dishwasher, there is a distinction between a dishwasher that's made from stainless steel or a dishwasher that is made from enamel. Some people say that dishwasher made from enamel, you cannot kasher, because enamel is normally something that we have difficulty kashering unless you use actual fire and all sorts of other things, bring it up to the temperature which it was originally fashioned, which is very, very difficult in the normal domestic situation. But if it's stainless steel, if the inside is stainless steel, and even though there might be pieces of plastic there are those poskim who say that's quite okay to kasher plastic. The best way of doing it is because it is to actually run the dishwasher. First of all, clean. It has to be thoroughly cleaned again. It shouldn't be used for 24 hours. Then run the dishwasher at the highest temperature, empty, 3 times. And that 3 times running it at the highest temperature is considered by quite a number of poskim as being sufficient. You've got to be careful though with the baskets, because the baskets are interwoven. Many baskets are interwoven. We're worried about pieces of chometz, actual pieces of chometz being caught in the various crevices, the nooks and crannies that are in those baskets, and therefore a lot of poskim will say don't kasher the baskets. If you want to kasher the Pesach, you can kasher the walls by putting it on at that temperature 3 times the highest temperature, but then get new baskets for Pesach itself. But again, you have to use a common sense. If you see that the baskets are not that interwoven and they can be cleaned thoroughly, then technically speaking, you could kasher them as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and it can be quite challenging, I think, to get to all the nooks and crannies, the crevices of the dishwasher.
One has to be very careful in a dishwasher. Also, the area where at the bottom where the drain is, there's all little filters and things like that. You have to really look at that area, pull them out, clean them thoroughly, because there you can actually have pieces that are there, and no kashering will help when there are still pieces of actual chometz in there. Wow.
Okay, moving right along. How about a microwave? Is it better to get a new microwave? Is it possible to kasher one's chometz stick microwave?
With the microwave, if we're trying to apply the concept of Kabbalah Kachpel to the way in which it receives the chometz, the way in which it gives it off, microwave is different by the fact that the microwaves are not hot. They don't cause the heat, the metal or whatever it is that's in the microwave, the material that it's made out of, the glass base, they don't actually cause the heat, those things to become hot. What causes them to become hot is the actual food that's resting on it becomes hot, and therefore transfers that heat to the rest of the oven. So therefore there is talk about exactly what sort of kashering do you need there. A consensus has been reached by many poskim, not by all, but by many poskim, that the way in which you can kasher it is if you take a glass of water, you put it inside, again, after 24 hours waiting, cleaning the surface completely, then you take a glass of water, put it inside the oven, turn on the oven, and let the water bubble for a minute or 2, so that the steam goes all around the oven. That steam condenses on the oven, comes to water and steam. That water and steam will be good enough to kasher, because that's the way in which the thing became chometz in the first place, from the food. Others say that when you've done it the first time, wait to turn it off and then be carefully, or handling it carefully, move the glass across, and to do that again, because the area where the glass was actually sitting on wouldn't have been kashered because it's covered by the glass. And there are many poskim who say that under those circumstances it's good enough. Nevertheless, because of the fact that many people put food directly onto the plate of the microwave, then therefore what you should do is to, as much as possible, ensure that the either the plate is as much as possible covered, and also we have to make sure that the way in which you can cover it, by the way, is by putting on plastic wrap around a number of layers of plastic wrap. And as we said beforehand, if the food doesn't actually touch the chometz sticker plate, then it's not such a problem. And others actually just buy a spare plate for Pesach and change the whole plate for Pesach. Mm-hmm. So if one wants to kasher it, there is a way to kasher it, but not everybody agrees. So therefore, again, it's up to you to decide what standard you want to keep.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that was very clear, very beneficial. Moving right along to a somewhat controversial topic, that is Kitniyot. Kitniyot is a minhag that evolved in the times of the Rishonim, going back centuries, where primarily Ashkenazic Jewry did refrain from eating certain types of food on Pesach. Among these foods are legumes like peas and beans. Excuse me. Also, there are certain grains like buckwheat and rice. Different types of food that the Ashkenazi Jews have refrained from eating. You have some Sephardim also who refrain from them, but it's primarily an Ashkenazi minhag. Now, this Isser of Kitniyot, this minhag of Kitniyot, the Pais can bring a number of reasons for this minhag. One reason is that they grew, say rice grew in close proximity, or grows in close proximity to the 5 grains. Chometz on Pesach is only food made from the 5 grains. That's wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. And the Kitniyot would grow, the beans, the peas, would grow in close proximity to the 5 grains. And there was a fear of cross-contamination, that in your bag of rice there might be some actual chometz grains. Other reasons for Kitniyot is confusion. That maybe they physically have certain characteristics similar to that of the grains. They're used in the same capacity. You make bread from cornbread, you can make rice bread. And therefore there's confusion that if we permit these foods, some unlearned Jews might come to think that the chometz grains themselves are permitted. So therefore, the minhag evolved not to eat any Kitniyot over Pesach. As time went on, and there's the new world crop, new grains, new foods came into the market, so there's somewhat of a machlokes haposkim, if I'm not mistaken, about the status of these new foods. Are they included in the prohibition of Kitniyot or not? The big discussion in the past number of years has been quinoa. Is quinoa Kitniyot? Some hashgacha said they are, some rabbanim said they are, some say Kitniyot is not, quinoa is not Kitniyot. What is the Kosher Australia position on quinoa? Is it or is it not Kitniyot?
We have taken the position of the majority of mainstream kashrut organizations to say that technically quinoa itself is not Kitniyot, because it is a totally different type of growth, of vegetable, whatever you want to call it, that is not really a grain like other things are, but it is used in certain areas similar to grains. I don't know whether they actually make bread from it in South America where it originally comes from, but it is used similar to it and looks like it. If you see a plate of quinoa there, it looks like very much like one of the grains. And so therefore in those circumstances people were saying, look, it shouldn't be used. But the majority of people say, no, it's not. It doesn't really look like grains. You look at it, it looks totally different to rice and to other things. It's not used in the same way. It's just cooked up, and it's usually not made into bread or flour or anything else like that. And therefore they say no reason that we have to be machmir and add one decree, another decree, and say that it's no good. And that's at the moment now the mainstream. But there is another problem. And they have found that in the areas that grow, where the quinoa is grown, they do grow other crops. And in the area where the Kitniyot is packed, in the factories where they are packed, they do package other things as well. They'll package rice, they'll package... and you have to have at least some sort of hashgacha, some sort of overseeing to make sure that there is no cross-contamination, because, as just mentioned, one of the reasons for Kitniyot is because it did grow in areas and it could contain things of the 5 grains, pieces of the five grains, and become contaminated that way. So therefore, the consensus of opinion nowadays is, and we have adopted that consensus as well, it is not Kitniyot, but you have to make sure that the Kitniyot that you buy, the quinoa that you buy is not just ordinary quinoa. It has actually been checked and has a certification that it's been checked to ensure that it does not have any cross-contamination. Kosher Pesach quinoa, in other words.
So would that apply to Sephardim who are buying rice and things like that, they not just buy the regular rice they buy all year round. There should be special KLP kosher Pesach.
They should definitely consult with their rabbis in that regard, because we have found that certain rice, for instance, is sometimes sprayed with different things in order to stop it from sticking together and in packaging, during the packaging, and there can be actual chometz involved in that particular process. So just because a Sephardi eats rice doesn't mean you can pick up any packet of rice and eat it. It has to be checked. Kosher Australia has actually checked a few things for Sephardim who do eat Kitniyot, in order to ensure that they will be able to keep their custom of eating Kitniyot, but not transgressing Pesach in other ways because the Kitniyot have been contaminated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Now, there's another product on the market that I think is Kitniyot related. There's a big machlokes whether this is permissible for Ashkenazim on Pesach, and that is Diet Coke. Some people are saying that there's Kitniyot in Diet Coke, others are saying, no, it's mutter. What is the machlokes, what is this dispute based upon, and what is the Kosher Australia position?
Diet Coke uses sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, and some of the artificial sweeteners, most of the artificial sweeteners used today, are actually of Kitniyot origin. They come from the type of product falls, according to all opinions, under the category of Kitniyot. The only difference being that it is so processed. There are some that say that this is called Kitniyot shenishtana, Kitniyot that it's changed its form, and therefore once it's changed its form already, it's not the original Kitniyot. There are those who say that perhaps it would be permitted because of the fact that the Kitniyot is only a custom anyhow, therefore perhaps it would be permitted once it's totally changed its form. Some say yes, some say no. The people who normally, for instance in Israel, okay the Diet Coke for kashrus reasons, won't okay it for Pesach because of that problem, whereas somebody else comes in who has a different opinion and will, at least for Pesach, the Diet Coke will be under their supervision rather than under normal supervision. We adopted the policy of the majority, not all, but the majority of mainstream kosher organizations, to say that there is a problem with it, and therefore we recommend that a person, if you can keep away from it, keep away from it. And so therefore, under those circumstances, Kosher Australia doesn't recommend these products, these diet products that do have the problematic sweeteners in them. I have heard just a week or two ago that some of the companies are aware of this now, and Pepsi Max, the diet Pepsi drink in America, is now using a totally kosher Pesach sweetener, artificial sweetener. Hopefully we might be able to get them to do that here in Australia, and at least make some batches that will be okay. But for the time being, we take the position of the mainstream organizations, and we don't recommend Diet Coke unless it is actually certified for Pesach under a proper supervision, under a reliable supervision.
And again, the issue being that when the Kitniyot, if a piece of corn is a piece of corn, that's for sure Kitniyot, let's say we go. If that's been changed into a liquid form, that would be an example of Kitniyot shenishtana, and that's the issue over here, is that
not only a liquid, it has to go more than a liquid, because that's another question about oils. Right. Oils as to
that's good enough. Maybe that's not.
It's even more. Kitniyot shenishtana is even more so, because it actually goes through a process of drying and heating and all sorts of things that could make it totally different. You pick up a piece of aspartame, which is one of the sweeteners, you will not see that's.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, moving along to our next question. Also a big shaila every year. Many tens and tens, not hundreds of shilas come into the office in this regard. Rabbanim all over the world, I'm sure, are all getting these shilas. Medicines on Pesach. What is our approach to medicines on Pesach? Many medications contain chometz, many contain Kitniyot. Everyone agrees. There's two sides to the spectrum. Everyone agrees that if a person has lo aleinu, a disease that could be deadly, let's say it's a person's taking medication for epilepsy or for cancer or for cardiac disease, then for sure they take the medication, even if there's chometz inside, unless they consult a doctor and a rabbi to make sure that it's okay to change. But they can assume that it's suffix lekanos nefashis, and therefore they can take the medication, no questions asked. On the other side of the spectrum, we have people who are taking a daily multiple vitamin, let's say. They're perfectly healthy. It's not recommended by the doctor. They just feel they want to have a vitamin. That, even if there's only Kitniyot in there, a person should stay away from. The question I'd like to ask is the middle ground, where a person, let's say, gets migraines. He's taking medication for his migraines, or pre- and postnatal vitamins that are recommended by a doctor. What is the approach to these medications for these medical conditions Can one take it even if it's chometz, or only if it's kitniyot, or even if it's not kitniyot? What's the approach?
Well, personally, my personal approach is that, and this is reflected in what we rule as far as Kosher Australia's recommendations as well. We always say consult with your rabbi, because that's important as well. Just because Kosher Australian rabbis decide on a certain thing like this, it's not a matter of actually knowing whether there's chometz in it or there's not chometz in it. We produce those lists that give that information. It is actually a question: is what do I do once I know what's in it? What do I do then under the circumstances where I've been taking it till now? Can I continue to take it during Pesach and so on? It's a question you need to discuss with your particular role. My own personal opinion is that in the circumstances where a doctor has prescribed a medication, in other words, you had to go to a doctor, the doctor's prescribed the medication, and he's prescribed that medication for a good reason. It's not just he's telling you take an aspirin because you've got a headache, but he's giving you something because you've got an ailment that needs a prescription drug. Under those circumstances, that can fall into the category of not necessarily having to know whether it's chometz or whether it's not. You just take it because it's been prescribed by the doctor. That being said, if you can find a substitute that is not chometz, and it's maybe even kitniyot rather than chometz, because kitniyot, most people say that when it comes to medicines, the rule of kitniyot doesn't apply.
Would that be even for a vitamin, let's say?
No.
Okay.
Where it is a medical reason to take something, then obviously kitniyot is much less of a problem than if it's actual chometz in it. That's why we produce our lists, because there can be a lot of the fillers in tablets, for instance, can be starch, can be flour, and it sometimes can be corn flour, it can be maize starch as they call it, and it can sometimes be wheat starch. So wheat starch is actual chometz, maize starch is only kitniyot. So we would say, if you got a chance to take the same medicine with your doctor's permission, never make that decision yourself, but with your doctor's permission, he says, and he identifies, or you can identify for him and ask, is it good enough I can take this substitute instead, always best to take one that's got kitniyot rather than one that's chometz. And if you can find one without any kitniyot at all, then that's even better. But as I mentioned, with regard to kitniyot and medicines, that's okay. But that's only with regard to prescription medicines. If it comes to a cough lozenge, or if it comes to a vitamin, as was just mentioned, then in those circumstances, they're not really essential medicines. And if they're not really essential medicines, then don't use it. Why put yourself in a situation where you might be transgressing? Now, some people say that when it comes to the way in which you swallow, when you're swallowing tablets, it's not the normal way of eating. But however, others will counter that and say, and so therefore it's not such a problem. Others will say, no, they counter that and they say, once you are eating it, it shows that you want to eat it, and therefore who cares how you eat it, you're eating it. And if you're eating it and it's chometz, you've got a problem. So there's a whole difference of opinion with regard to that aspect as well. So basically the rule of thumb is, if it's prescribed by the doctor, you can't find a substitute that you know is only kitniyot or doesn't have any chometz at all, you're allowed to take it if the doctor says it's important for you to take it. There are vitamins and vitamins. If, for instance, a woman needs to take an iron tablet because the doctor says that can affect the baby if she doesn't take it or whatever, in those circumstances it's quite different than if I want to just take one for the sake of, I want to feel a little bit healthier.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that. Another question we'll be getting this year more than other years, interestingly enough, is what's the approach to non-traditional medicines? Homeopathic medicines that have not been proven in a clinical sense to be effective, like probiotics, things like that. If there are concerns of chometz, what's the approach to those medications?
I think that most of those medications, although they can be very healthy for you, and I'm not going into the pros and cons of these types of medications, but most of those vitamins are there not because they're fighting some sort of immediate real health problem that a person's got, could become very sick from. It's usually preventative. It's usually building up your immune system and so on. And I would ask, the first thing I would ask the doctor is, or the practitioner, whoever it is, the naturopath, I'd ask them is it okay to take off a week? Will it really affect the proceedings if I don't have it for a week? And if the doctor says, yeah, it's okay, this is something that basically you need in your system, but if you take a week off, not the worst thing in the world, then you shouldn't take the risk and you shouldn't use that particular product. But once again, it's not considered as a prescription drug. It's not fighting actually something that at the moment now is going to save your health, and therefore in those circumstances I would say that avoid it. If, however, your practitioner tells you, look, this is really urgent. If you don't take this, something terrible is going to happen to you. The whole system is going to collapse, or whatever it is. Then it becomes again a matter of sakana. And if it really is a matter of sakana, then in those circumstances, a matter of danger to life, then in those circumstances you have the same rulings as far as medication is concerned.
Well, without getting into all the controversy surrounding this, these medicines, but let's say a doctor will tell you that it's absolutely no concern. The homeopath is telling you that there is a concern, but the doctor's saying, there's no concern. Who do we follow?
I know I'm going to get into trouble for saying this from some people, but in reality we say that a doctor has the nemanis. If you have one says one thing, one says the other thing, the professional doctor who's recognized by all as being a doctor, he's got his degree and so on. In those circumstances, according to halacha, many times, even if the patient themselves says, I don't want to do something, so therefore I don't want to break Shabbos, but the doctor says, you need to, we listen to the doctor, we don't listen to the patient, even the patient himself. So therefore, in those circumstances, the doctor really, I think halachically would take precedence over somebody who's got this particular profession of alternative medicines and so on, but the alternative medicines have not yet been proven to be as effective as true, real medical advice. And I know there's some people who'll debate me on that and say, alternative medicine is better. The doctors don't care as much as the alternative people, but for the time being, at least, that is the halacha.
Very interesting. Thank you. Moving right along, everyone always tries to purchase all their Pesach products before Pesach. But let's say a person runs out of fruits and vegetables, or even, potato starch, whatever it might be. Could a person just walk into a shopping center, where you have all the fruits and vegetables that are out on display on Pesach, on Chol Hamoed, and there's chometz everywhere? Is it okay just to walk into a store with this chometz everywhere and purchase food on Pesach, or should one really, really endeavor to buy everything beforehand? And if you're running short, so then so be it.
There is a very strong consensus that you don't walk into a place that sells chometz on Pesach. For a number of reasons. Number one, you never know what contamination has happened on Pesach itself. The whole year round, you don't have to worry about the fact that the fellow was handing the onions that just previously handed the rolls, because the amount that might have come onto the onions is so little, it becomes bottled before Pesach. On Pesach, we have the rule, bittul does not apply. Even b'mashu, the slightest, smallest amount, is not nullified on Pesach itself. So therefore, on Pesach itself, going into a place where there's a possibility of contamination, you can't rely on the normal statement, how much could it really be contaminated? Such a tiny little bit. Even if it's the tiniest of tiniest bits, on Pesach itself, chometz is not nullified. And so therefore one has to be very careful. In addition to that, there's also the problem of what we call maras ayin. Somebody sees you walking into a place on Pesach, and a place that's selling, right next to it, they're selling the rolls in the bakery section of Coles, for instance, and next to it is the vegetable section. They see you heading in that direction. They might think, oh my gosh, I thought that person kept Pesach. But now I see that really questionable. Look, they're going off to buy a roll. And even if there's the slightest possibility of that happening, maras ayin, the giving the wrong impression, applies. As I say, even b'chadrei chadorim, even the innermost rooms where you're only by yourself, where there's a question of maras ayin concern, somebody might find out, somebody might see, it's considered not permitted. So for that reason alone. And if you're really stuck, and you really don't have anything that you can possibly rely on as far as food is concerned, unless you have to go and buy that particular food, then some people say, all right, send somebody else in, somebody who's not Jewish, a non-Jewish friend or a non-Jewish helper or whatever it is to go in. So the maras ayin aspect is at least covered. And you have to make sure, and you have to be able to know that you can trust them, that they themselves are not going to handle it in a way in which there can be contamination on Pesach itself.
Mm-hmm. So it'd be advisable, I guess, to for sure wash off the fruit, maybe even peel the fruit.
Peel the fruit in that circumstances, yeah.
You should peel the fruit. Okay, very good. Okay, one last question we have time for. Pets. Many people have pets, fish, dogs, cats, and often the pet food has chometz in it. Can one give his pet chometz on Pesach? And if not, and he can't find an alternative, what could he do as far as keeping his pet fed well on Pesach?
Well, in our chometz forms that we actually sell your pets. If you write down there that you want to sell the chometz, we sell the pet along with the chometz. So technically speaking, it's not your pet; it's the non-Jewish pet. But you cannot have itself. You cannot yourself have any benefit whatsoever from chometz. So even if you're feeding to your pet, that's considered having a benefit. You're looking after your pet. If it's somebody else's pet and you're feeding them, well, maybe you can say, you can perhaps argue that I'm not really having benefit from it. The non-Jewish person who now owns my cat, he's having benefit from it rather than me. But still, you're handling chometz. So therefore, the ideal thing to do in those circumstances, if you don't have the kosher, the Pesach alternative of feeding you know, for the 8 days or whatever it may be, feeding them something that's not actual chometz, we have a whole list in our kosher bulletin of Pesach foods. Oh, sorry, not Pesach foods, but pet foods that are kosher for Pesach. So there's a big variety there. But if you find yourself in a circumstance where your pet is going to starve because you don't have what to feed them, then remember that the pet is not yours. Ask your neighbor, can you please feed my dog, or can you please feed my cat? And whatever he feeds them, he feeds them, because you're not having benefit from it. Your pet may be having benefit from it, but it's not your pet anymore. It's sold to the non-Jew. If you don't want to sell your pets, I have every year a few people who cross out and saying, I'm not selling my cat. And they cross out that from the form. Then in those circumstances, you have to feed your pet kosher Pesach food.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope this was informative, and please, if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to send it into the office at Kosher Australia. Wishing everyone a Chag Kosher V'Sameach.
Chag Kosher V'Sameach.